You are listening to SRM Insider. This is the Cyber Intelligence Briefing, your weekly roundup of the latest cybersecurity news and insights, straight from SRM's leading global incident response team. Welcome to another episode of SRM's Cyber Intelligence Briefing. I'm Kyle Schwebler, and I'm joined by my colleagues Miles Arkwright and James Teitler.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. This week, we'll look at a critical vulnerability affecting Cisco networking appliances. 2 ransomware groups have been shut down. US companies have unknowingly hired thousands of North Korean IT workers under false identities. Electronics and watch manufacturer Casio has suffered a data breach. Okta, the identity and access management provider, has also had sensitive data exposed. And finally, we'll touch on ransomware attacks affecting 2 US public bodies. Last week, a maximum severity vulnerability affecting Cisco networking appliances running the iOS XE software was disclosed. The vulnerability is being exploited in the wild, and unfortunately, no patch has been released yet. James, can you provide listeners a bit more information about this vulnerability?
Sure. So this vulnerability impacts devices which have the web user interface enabled and also have HTTP or HTTPS server in use and open to the internet. So attackers can essentially exploit this vulnerability to create a highly privileged account, which then they can then use to gain control of the impacted system. So tens of thousands of devices are believed to have been exploited already, with the attacks going back to the 18th of September.
I know that at the time of this recording, a patch hasn't been released yet, although I think one is apparently in the works. So what would you advise listeners to do if they are running this vulnerable software?
Well, the first thing to do would be to check if the HTTP or HTTPS server is enabled and publicly accessible. If so, it should be disabled immediately, or at the very least, restricted to trusted private networks. The next step would be to check for compromise. So Cisco have released some IOCs and detection rules to help with this. And you can also find these in our recent cyber threat advisory about this vulnerability on our website.
On a separate and more positive note, the FBI, Europol, and other European police agencies have managed to take down the Ragnar ransomware group, with reports coming out that multiple arrests have been made.
They're actually not the only ransomware group, Miles, to have been disrupted this past week. TriGone ransomware, who we've dealt with several times already, they themselves were hacked by the Ukrainian Cyber Alliance. The UCA, which is a hacktivist group focused on defending Ukraine against Russia, exploited the Confluence vulnerability that we actually discussed a few weeks back to gain control of TriGone's infrastructure. They even seized the ransomware leak site.
Yeah, although it is nice to report on some good news stories, it's important to remember that while the takedown of infrastructure does cause major disruption to threat actor activities, ransomware gangs are notoriously persistent and will likely find new ways to re-establish themselves.
Yeah, I think that's right. We have seen quite a lot of law enforcement action over the last few years, but this ransomware threat just doesn't seem to subside. In other news, though, the FBI announced this week that they've discovered that some US firms have unknowingly employed thousands of North Korean IT workers using false identities on remote contracts. Their earnings may even have been used to fund North Korea's missile program. The FBI have also alleged that some of these workers stole data from their company's network.
Yeah, I think this story really underlines how important it is to carefully vet all new employees, including remote contractors who might only be employed on a short-term basis. This will also help mitigate the risk from insider threat.
And James, we've also seen a couple of data breaches this week, haven't we?
Yeah, that's right, Miles. So the Japanese watch manufacturer Casio reported that it suffered a data breach after a third-party accessed a database holding customer records from 149 countries. So the database was apparently hosted in a development network which had weaker security management controls in place.
And then you've also got Okta, who are an identity and access management provider. They revealed a breach where hackers used stolen credentials to access their support case management system. And at the moment, it appears that threat actors were able to view customer upload information, which contained sensitive cookies and session token data. This is a concern because if the session data is active, hackers could use it to gain unauthorized access to customer accounts. And so all of this really reinforces that need for organizations to manage the sharing of cookie and session tokens, but to then also revoke tokens when no longer required.
Yeah. Before we go, Miles, I said earlier that the ransomware threat just doesn't ever seem to subside. I saw that the Kansas Supreme Court suffered a ransomware attack.
Yeah, you're right. The court are apparently having to run paper records following the attack. But it isn't just the Kansas Supreme Court who have been hit. There's Rock County Health Department in Wisconsin. They've been targeted by the Cuba ransomware group. The latest on this is that they've rejected the $1.9 million ransom demand.
Yes, that's right. I mean, it's great to see that Rock County was able to reject the criminal demands outright. I think this speaks to the importance of having secure backups and also a well-rehearsed ransomware readiness playbook to minimize the impact of these sorts of attacks.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks both. And that brings us to an end of this week's episode. So please do join us again next week. As always, you can access a written version of this briefing on our website.
Bye, everyone.
Until next week, goodbye.